first few and then had them try a couple on their own, and then that kind of gave me a better idea. Are they still needing my support to help them, or are they able to take it on their own or work with a partner and do that? So informal instruction assessments are very important for my teaching and where I'm going to go with it. Some kids in that group I knew they had it, others I could identify still really needed my guidance.
Excellent. What do you feel like your strengths were within that lesson?
I feel like my strengths within that lesson were repeating. I know that they need a lot of repetitive, so whether it was repeating the directions or repeating the definitions. I also felt that a strength was progression of the lesson, not just sitting doing the matching. They had mastered that, time to move on. So progressing according to what they showed me. If they hadn't mastered it, we would have gone back or continued. So I felt that gauging their learning and then progressing them through appropriately was another strength that I had.
I agree, and I think another strength was your time management and your ability to read the students. So for you to know when to stop that pre-teaching skill and to move on to the next step to get them to use the skill a little bit more independently was a good read for the amount of time that you had the students in front of you. And that was important to make sure that the rigor stayed high enough and your expectations stayed high, but you also supported them in the way that they needed to. So I thought that was excellent. What would you take from that lesson that worked really well to continue with cause and effect now for the students? Because we want that skill to now be secure.
Right. After that lesson, I did identify that most of the students were secure with being able to match cause and effect. So I feel like that's secure and done, so the progression and the rigor needs to continue. I think some of them still struggled a little bit with being able to create sentences with cause and effect, where knowing that is a challenging skill, I would probably now start my lesson there and then actually progress to having them read a passage and find cause and effect within a reading passage, which is a little bit more challenging. So I would identify what they've mastered, start with where they might have struggled with, give them the instruction, see how they do, working with one another and independently maybe a little bit more because it was heavily guided.
Right.
And then progress to reading comprehension.
Is there any opportunity for them to continue that skill during maybe a science lesson?
Absolutely, yeah. We address science and social studies generally through our reading curriculum, through the passages. So we will work with the story of the week, and we will address that skill within the skill, which is generally has a science connection. The theme of the week was people in nature, so we're doing a lot of science and cause and effect into that.
Excellent. I felt that
areas.
ties in nicely. Tell me a little bit about what you expect of your independent stations. I noticed when I was in your classroom, you had a teacher table running, and then you had 3 or 4 other stations running. And students were on task. They were able to understand what they were doing in the stations. You did have 1 or 2 students come up and ask you, and you were able to redirect them to figure out what they needed to do on their own. Tell me how you've come to that classroom management style, and is that what it's like every day during your ELA block?
For the most part, we run centers. There's an independent center, a partner reading, a teacher table, and a writing workstation. And the groups transition through all the different stations. It does take time, and some days are better than others, to be honest with you, to get that schedule and that management down for both myself and the students and how they transition and work with one another. But they all know what they are to do. Objectives are posted, the directions are posted. Given that, still students sometimes need a little bit more direction or clarification, and so it's sometimes difficult when I am at the teacher table to do that because I am instructing the group in front of me. I try to generally have them find someone in the group to help them first before coming to me, but they all should be on task. They should all know what the assignment is, what they're working on, and require maybe occasional guidance from me to redirect them to task. And
And that's what I was going to mention to you. When the student came over with a problem, it did not take away from your instruction at your teacher table, and you were very easily able to say, could you go ask so-and-so in your group? So you identified a model that you knew would know what to do and was on task. I did watch that student. They went over and asked appropriately, found out what to do, and then continued on with the lesson. So that shows great rapport you have as far as setting up your classroom and what your expectations are for your students. What do you think your goals were for the lesson? Were they met? Were they not met? Do you feel like there'll be a secure skill for them leaving third grade? Was this an introduction? How do you feel that the assessment of, especially the group that was in front of you?
I actually feel that my goal for that specific lesson was met. I had different goals for each activity within the lesson. My first goal for the first activity was just, like I said, to be able to match cause with effect, and they met that. They were able to do that well. Then with the next activity, it was a little more challenging, identifying the cause and effect. I would say that's ongoing still. For some of the students within the group had met that, but I did notice that some of the other students struggled with that a little bit more. So depending on the student, and this is where the teaching gets challenging, noticing a few within a small group and then a small group within a larger group. So some of the objectives were met by some students, and it will be ongoing. Cause and effect is one of those skills that carries on and gets more challenging as the grade continues. So I feel that it will be something that we'll continue to work on and up the rigor, knowing that most of the students have that basic foundational understanding of cause and effect. So now it's time to up the rigor.
Excellent. And I noticed before they left the teacher table, they had an assignment to work on that was going to take them into that independent station. Were you able to use that as a good informal assessment?
Absolutely. So, and it was, what we did within the small group was we did the first few together, and I left the next couple blank to see, without my guidance, are they able to? And they turn those in, and I'm able to look at them and see, this one has it, this one doesn't.
And what was your finding? The majority of the students have it secure, or did you feel like you're going to need to go back and reteach that?
Well, like I said, it is a skill that we're going to continue, but I do know that for some aspect of the skill, it's secure, and I'll be able to let that go and move on.
Good. The last thing that I'd like to talk to you about is your classroom management and how you gave some nonverbal cues to your group and how the students responded. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, so one of the nonverbal cues we use is, we've started it in math and we're trying to carry it over into language arts. So some of them are used to using it in one subject area, so some of them still have a little bit of a hard time transitioning it to somewhere else. But basically when they have an answer, they'll do this, which lets me know that they have an answer.
Okay.
And letting them know that it's okay if they don't, but they're thinking. What that helps do is hopefully prevent impulsivity with some students in the group that got it, no, I want to shout it out, but then that takes away from the time for the other students to think and digest and try to come up with their own answers. So we're working with that, but it allows them a little bit of a safety net. Like, I'm thinking, I don't know it yet, but I'm working towards it.
I feel like that was good for some active learning and also to control the impulsivity, which worked for one of the students in your group.
Yeah.
Excellent. I enjoyed it coming up.